for all of us. It's about predicting where the consumer is going and getting half of it right.
One of the things we want to do is create ads that don't suck.
Embracing change creates great possibility.
I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today. On the show today, I've got Simmy Kustanowitz. Simmy's built a reputation as an idea generator and a creative fixer by utilizing two easy steps, simplify and gamify, to solve any company's toughest challenges. As an Emmy-nominated TV producer, Simmy's held high-level positions across multiple genres, ranging from live events to high-budget scripted sitcoms, to reality docu-series and studio game shows. He's best known, perhaps, for the hit series Impractical Jokers, as he spearheaded the comedy reality show while on the network side and then reshaped it as the showrunner and executive producer. He's also the chief creative officer for Bad Woods Entertainment, the production company founded by the stars of Impractical Jokers. Simmy spent a number of years at WarnerMedia, overseeing scripted and unscripted projects across TBS, TNT, True TV. Before WarnerMedia, he served as a showrunner for several projects and was head writer for the hit comedy game show Silent Library and MTV's long-running series Total Request Live, or TRL. On the show today, we'll talk about the lessons that he's learned over the 20 plus years of entertainment industry experience and how his creative workshop, Rethink the Way You Think, helps corporate teams streamline their internal communication and external messaging through surprisingly easy to apply creative strategies. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Simmy Kustanowitz. Well, Simmy, welcome to the show.
Alan, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm looking forward to having this conversation. We have an interesting way to start. I hear you're so good at marketing that you get death threats. I think that's the first.
Yes. Yeah. Hear me out. Let me back out. Yes, I did. I actually received 3 death threats for the same marketing campaign. This is what happened. Going into season 3, we created this new graphic open. That's the graphics that start at the top of a show, right? So there's animation and all these really fun elements. There was all this Staten Island iconography that we put into that graphic open because the stars of the show, the Impractical Jokers, are from Staten Island. Q, who's one of the Jokers, one of the stars of the show, his name is Brian Quinn. We call him Q. He really wanted a map of Staten Island floating behind his head during the graphic open of the show, which I thought seemed a little silly. I said no. We went back and forth. He was upset. We had this extended fight over email. And ultimately, he did not get the map behind him, but he let it go and cooler heads prevailed. Anyway, it became a running joke between me and Q for many years. Fast forward about 6 years later, we were preparing the new season. I think it was season 8 of Impractical Jokers. And I was meeting with our marketing team at True TV and TBS, as I often did. But at the beginning of a season, we were trying to figure out new ways to market the show for viewers that were maybe a little bit more out of the box than your typical promo campaign where we'd show clips of the upcoming season. I brought up this fight that Q and I had back in season 3. And together with the marketing team, we developed this idea to produce a fake documentary, a mockumentary, where I would be interviewed, Q would be interviewed, and we would make it seem like this was actually a fight between the two of us about the stupid map in the graphic open. So we hired a well-known documentary filmmaker named Jonathan Hawk, who had directed a lot for ESPN for their 30 for 30 franchise. And he created this slick 8-minute fake documentary that we posted online. Fans loved it. It was viewed hundreds of thousands of times. You can find it on YouTube now. It's called An Island Between Us. And it was about this fight over the map between me and Q. The fans took it very seriously. Some of them realized it was a joke, but a lot of them thought it was legit. And I started receiving some really angry messages. A couple people approached me on the street about it, said, you got to give Q his map. And I did receive 3 death threats. 3 separate people came at me on Twitter. One of them said, Q really deserves his map. Who does Simmy think he is? Simmy must die. But fortunately, I lived to tell the tale. And we had a rating spike at the beginning of the season. It was a success. So that is my story of receiving death threats from a marketing campaign.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And having my only understanding of Staten Island comes from my wife's Italian family who grew up there. That's a dangerous place to mess with, Simmy.
You don't want to mess with Staten Island. It was definitely playing with fire for sure.
Yes. You might end up in a landfill somewhere. You never know. So Awesome. I don't know how we top that, but we'll try. So from death threats and Impractical Joker mockumentaries to becoming a producer. If you back up, like, how did you get your start in life and business? And what was the pathway to becoming a producer for shows like Impractical Joker?
I mean, at the beginning of my work life, I used to say I'm a writer. I'm not a producer. I was the head writer at a show called Total Request Live, otherwise known as TRL, which was this popular talk show that ran for about 10 years, used to be hosted by Carson Daly on MTV. I was a writer on a bunch of different shows, mostly in the MTV VH1 Viacom world. And then I began writing. I was the head writer on this comedic game show called Silent Library on MTV. And when I started working on that, my boss at the time, Adam Dolgens, promoted me to supervising producer. He said, you seem to have an eye for the edit, for what makes these episodes work. You're able to fix these issues that come up that go beyond the writer's room. So we think you could be a producer. So I started producing on that show. And then I started show running a number of different projects. I landed at the Turner Networks at True TV specifically, along with TBS and TNT, which I would work at later. And I started overseeing lots of different shows, scripted sitcoms and reality shows and game shows. I became a development executive, and I worked in the development and original programming department, worked very closely with our marketing team, and quickly realized that I really had a mind for marketing and a love of marketing. That some of my favorite moments on all of these shows was working with the marketing team on the key art, on what the posters, billboards would look like the coming season, and what taglines we would use. That was always something that spoke to me. And similar to what I just described with Impractical Jokers, I loved the notion of generating different creative ideas that could help market a show. So I worked there on the network side for about 8 years. And then I left to run the production company for the stars from Impractical Jokers, started pitching shows with those guys and developing new ideas. And while I did that, I also took over Impractical Jokers as the showrunner a couple seasons ago. We had to reinvent the format because one of the Jokers left the show. One of the four guys, Joe Gatto, left. And so once he did, we had to reinvent the format a little bit. And so the network called and said to me, you've always been our creative fixer. You've always managed to come in and fix projects when they were starting to go off the rails. Can you come in and help get Impractical Jokers back on track? And so I came in as the showrunner, and I've been running that ever since. So that's the entertainment side of my career.
Yeah. You've done a lot, just rattling off TRL, Silent Library, a number of different shows you impacted at True TV and TBS, TNT. What have you learned through all of this entertainment producing and writing and creative fixing, if you will?
So what I really learned throughout all those shows was that the network, when I worked at the network for 8 years, would have this tendency of having me oversee the shows that were the highest priority, had the highest budgets, often had the biggest problems. And the feeling that I had, the feeling that my bosses had, was that in crisis, and I put crisis in air quotes because it's television, so it's not real crisis, but in these high leverage situations, that's where I excel the most. And I've always felt that the higher the pressure in a situation, the better off I am. And I just find that I like running towards these fires on these shows, because I've found that when you take a deep breath and when you start thinking efficiently, when you start using tricks to think more efficiently and problem solve more productively, problems get fixed and problems begin to melt away. And once I unlocked how to do that, I started using those tools in all these different shows. And then once I did that, I realized that a lot of these tools that I use in the entertainment business and for these high stress and high priority shows, a lot of those skills could be used to help companies outside of entertainment and finance and real estate and healthcare and tech. And I started working with chief marketing officers at a lot of those companies and utilizing the tools that I've learned. And I've found that the world's a lot smaller than you might think. And while on the surface, it might seem like there's not so much connective tissue between the entertainment industry and, let's say, the world of finance, there actually is. And by using the tools that I've learned in entertainment, I've been able to help a lot of teams in a lot of other industries.
Oh. You said there's no quote unquote crisis, but death threats are pretty serious.
Yeah.
But yes, but the tools that you've learned, you're talking about working with companies now, like tell me about what you're doing with them and who are the types of companies that you're working with?
So big picture, I'm working with companies to help them think more efficiently and problem solve more productively. And I'm using, like I said before, the tools that I've learned throughout my career to help them do that. And I'm showing clips from TV shows that I've produced to illustrate those points, right? Just to give a couple of examples, there was one show that I oversaw when I was at the network. It's called Adam Ruins Everything. It was a show on True TV starring this amazing comedian, Adam Conover. And it was an educational comedy show. He would tackle subjects like prison recidivism and immigration and taxes, really dry topics, sometimes topics that might seem a little mundane. He would bring them to life. It was a comedy show. He would find ways to turn the mundane into magic. That was something that I always loved about Adam Ruins Everything. And so I used some lessons that we learned in producing that show, and I apply those to companies that say, listen, what we do is pretty dry. What I hear often at the beginning is, you're a television producer. How are you really going to be able to help us? And what I've learned is that so much of what so many companies struggle with comes down to storytelling. I was talking to a financial PR firm, and they originally said, we don't really see much crossover here. We love what you do, but we don't really see how it could help us. And I said to them, what do you do? And they said, well, a lot of what we do is creating the press releases when a CFO is hired or fired, right? Or different high-level people from the C-suite lose their jobs or start a new job. We have to go in and write that press release. And we're finding that a lot of our press releases are feeling the same. They're not jumping off the page. We're not really doing a great job of expressing what's happening. And I said, you're not telling your story the right way, right? So that's an example of something where I'm able to walk in and work with them and lead these workshops and help these teams learn how to not only create better products, not only write a stronger press release, but how to rethink the way they're thinking, right? My workshops are called Rethink the Way You Think, because I help teams use tricks that I've learned throughout my career to help themselves realize how creative they actually can be when they're trying to solve problems or really fix anything.
Talking about creativity, creative thinking, like, how do you define it? Like, it's a big concept. Everyone in marketing in my world talk about it a lot, but no one really thinks about, how do we compartmentalize it? How do we unpack it? What are the components of it? I'm curious to get your thoughts.
So really, any kind of thinking is creative thinking, but what really makes it creative, what really elevates thinking to creative thinking, in my opinion, is when you use structure within creativity. I'm a big believer in the notion that creativity needs structure to thrive. And I'll give you an example. I'm a big believer in using the clock, using a timer. My company is called Clock Tower Innovation, and the clock is a very big part of what I do. When I worked in live television, when I was at TRL, we had to write scripts and generate ideas, come up with games to play with celebrities on the spot sometimes, right? It was a show that was on live every day at 5 p.m. I had been, to that point in my career, I had been working on shows where we would have weeks at a time to come up with ideas, and you would toss ideas back and forth, and often it was paralysis by analysis. But then I worked on a live TV show, and there's a quote that always jumps to my mind. Lorne Michaels, who's of course, the executive producer of Saturday Night Live, once said, "We don't go on because we're ready. We go on because it's 11:30." And that, to me, sums up live television, right? You need to generate these ideas. You have this deadline. You're working up against the clock. But I found that when I worked on that show, my brain unlocked in a different way, because you don't have the luxury of spending weeks on end coming up with ideas. You have to come up with an idea, because whether or not you're ready, if it was 5 p.m., we had to go on the air. And I found that often I had better ideas in a 10-minute stretch or a 5-minute stretch than I did if you gave me a month to come up with an idea. And that really forms the backbone of these workshops when I'm working with companies in other industries, where if I sit down with a financial team, with a marketing team at a financial company, I'll set a timer and say, we're going to generate a bunch of ideas of how to fix this and this problem. We're going to do it in the next 5 minutes. Do we solve all the problems in 5 minutes? No, but we achieve so much more in those 5 minutes than we would if we just sat around and said, okay, let's start kicking around some ideas. It's a blank canvas. Let's go. When you set a timer and you keep an eye on the clock, amazing things happen.
I love that. And Lorne Michaels' quote is amazing. We don't go on because we're ready, because we go on because it's 11:30. That gets to the notion of, I think in the product world, we talk about just ship it, like just ship the product. And you'll naturally fix bugs and things like that over time, but you've got to get it out there. Otherwise, you've achieved nothing.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. You got to go. You just have to go. And when I'm sitting around with a group of people, it is amazing to watch what happens, that we sit there and I'll say, okay, I'm going to set a timer. We're going to brainstorm. Everyone says, yep. Okay. And then when I set it and say, okay, clock is ticking. We got 5 minutes. People sit up in their chairs in a different way. And people just, again, you see their brains unlocking in real time. And it's been incredibly rewarding.
Love it. And 5 minutes is a long time. I would encourage anyone listening to this to set a timer for 5 minutes and try to come up with a bunch of ideas. You'll figure out that you get a burst of things and then you're like, okay, that was a minute.
Time is incredibly flexible. Alan, if you ever want to appreciate how time can be flexible, 10 seconds sounds like a very short amount of time. Stare into a coworker's eyes for 10 seconds and see how long that feels. A minute is a long time. And I only realized that when I was working at TRL. My showrunner would say in my ear, because I would be on the floor, I would be in the studio holding the cue cards and writing on the cue cards for the host to read. And our showrunner would say, we are back in 60 seconds. And the first few weeks I would panic and that 60 seconds would fly. And then once I learned how to harness time, once I learned how to make time my friend instead of my enemy, I would take a deep breath, still have 55 seconds left. And you would see how much you can accomplish in 1 minute. It really is an amazing thing.
We're talking about time. That's probably one of the biggest breakdowns within teams. But what are some of the biggest breakdowns in your mind with teams when it comes to thinking more creatively and solving their own problems?
I think that there is a lot of overthinking. That is something so many companies I meet with, one of the first issues when I ask them what their problems are, they say our meetings are too long or we have too many people in the meetings. It's all about inefficiency. And that's when I say that there's so much in common between what I do in the entertainment industry and what people might do at a tech company or at a fashion line. At first, it felt aliens from two different planets meeting each other when I started meeting with the marketing teams at these different companies. But then once we actually started talking about what their issues were, it was inefficiency. It was long meetings. It was too many people in the room. It was, we go around and we aren't able to solve problems. And that's when I started saying, okay, let's start applying these rules that I've learned. So I go through these different rules in my workshop and then we apply them. And it's just been a lot of fun.
I wonder if you could share a few examples. Like, how does this work in practice? What does it look or feel like, if you will?
So I'll give you an example of one of my favorite brainstorming games. So there's something that I do called a 10-3 brainstorm. Now, a 10-3 brainstorm, I'm going to describe this. It is going to sound very simple, but that's what I love, simplicity. For me, everything I do comes down to two things. I simplify and I gamify. You have to simplify everything you're doing, right? You have to strip everything down to its studs and just simplify because everything gets way too complex, I find. A 10-3 brainstorm. Here's how it works. Let's say I'm working with a tech company and I ask them what their issue is, what they want to solve. And just for example, let's say that they're having a hard time connecting with their young professionals who are working there, right? They have all these people who are right out of college and they don't feel like they're connecting well with them. They don't feel like the young professionals are doing what they need to be doing. So what can we do about that? So a 10-3 brainstorm, I will set a timer for 10 minutes. And let's say there's 10 people in the room. I say to everyone, okay, we're all going to work on our own for 10 minutes, right? Everybody make a list of 1 through 10. And over the next 10 minutes, just generate 10 ideas of how you might reach this younger generation of workers, right? Who work for your company. So it could be anything. It could be incentivized a bonus structure, right? It could be a barbecue, right? A company barbecue, anything you want. Could be a great idea. It could be what you think is a terrible idea, but you come up with 10 things in the next 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes pass, right? So you have these 10 people that they have all written down 10 things. I set one more timer for 1 more minute. And for that 1 minute, I would say to them, okay, now take your list, your own personal list, and break it down to your top 3. So make a list of 3, right? So everyone at the end of those 11 minutes has their list of 10 and they have picked their top 3 out of those 10. They submit them to the front of the room and boom, we've got 30 ideas. And over the course of 11 minutes, we've generated 30 ideas for how to reach the younger professionals in this company. Are all those ideas going to be perfect? No. And of course, there's going to be some overlap between the ideas. But in those 11 minutes, you'll be far more productive than if you sat down and said, let's spend the next hour coming up with ideas of how to reach these people. So it's that sort of structure that I find really helps.
Yeah. No, and I love that example because it's, to your point, it's simple, but it's repeatable. If you have the discipline to do it. And the other thing is like you started with up to 100 ideas across those 10 people. And you're also getting the best of them prioritized by the people that came up with the ideas themselves. So you not only created ideas, you created many more ideas than you needed and then funneled down to the best of the best to get to those 30. So in 11 minutes, which is crazy.
And what's incredible is you sit there and when you set a timer for 10 minutes, at first it feels it's quick. It's a really long time out. And 10 minutes is a very long time. At the end, by 5 minutes, you're going to have a lot of people putting their pencils down, right? It's amazing. And I find that talking about the fact that I said 10 ideas, I find that quotas are hugely important. So much of what I teach and what I do in these sessions comes down to two things. It comes down to time and volume. Time is important, as I was just describing. I think that volume is so important. I really do believe that when you set quotas, when you say, we're going to come up with 5 ideas, or we're going to come up with 10 ideas, you become so much more productive than if you just say, let's just come up with a bunch of ideas. And again, some of those ideas are going to be terrible, right? You're going to have some shit ideas when you say we're going to generate this many ideas. But when you push your brain to hit that quota, often that's where you find another gear and you wind up generating ideas that are great in a short amount of time.
Right. You talk about you may have some really crappy ideas. You may have some really crappy ideas if you don't use this. Yeah. Things that just totally don't miss the mark entirely. This is awesome. Like I imagine, one, these companies are getting a ton out of you, helping them just think how to think better and problem solve themselves. Closing thoughts in terms of what companies should be thinking about to creatively problem solve other than call.
Yeah, that's the first step to call me. But I would say that I think that teams tend to get overwhelmed by how many issues they have. So something else that I like to do with teams, often at the start of a brainstorm, is say, we're going to set a timer. We're going to list all the issues you're having right now in your department. And it becomes this overwhelming feeling of, oh, we have so many issues. I worked with a fashion company and they were having issues rebranding and figuring out how to tell their company's story. And in 5 minutes, we wrote down 23 issues that the company was having. And at the end of that 5 minutes, everyone took a deep breath and said, oh man, this is tough. But then when you compartmentalize, when you take those 23 ideas and you say, okay, these 3 ideas are marketing related. These 4 are related to brick and mortar stores and issues we're having in different locations. These 2 issues are unsolvable. There's nothing we can do about it. But these 6 ideas are actually very solvable, right? When you break them down into different categories, if you compartmentalize and then attack, I find that problems become a lot more solvable, right? Every problem, there's a solution to every problem. I think that's something that I learned in the entertainment industry. And I find that it really translates well to other companies as well. There were so many times that there would be a show that I was working on where the budget was getting out of control and we had to deliver the show in a matter of days or weeks, whatever it was. And there was this feeling, whether people were saying it outwardly or not, of there's just no solution to this problem. And the answer is, of course there is. You just have to take a deep breath and work through it and not get too overwhelmed. So I think avoiding getting overwhelmed and intimidated by problems is something that companies really need to get better at.
One of the things I want to do is switch gears a little bit. We love to get to know the people behind the microphone, so to speak. And my favorite question to ask every guest that comes on is, has there been an experience of your past that defines or makes up who you are today?
There is. It did in my way back in the past. This is before I started my career. It was when I was a camp counselor at a Jewish summer camp called Camp Ramah in the Berkshires. I was a counselor for 15-year-olds. And I often look back at that as my origin story for creativity, because there is nothing I've experienced in my career that is more intimidating or more seemingly impossible of a task than getting 15-year-old boys interested and excited about anything in camp. There's a lot of boredom. They just want to play basketball all day. But we had activities, we had plays, we had all sorts of ways we needed to entertain these kids. Right? It was a sleepaway camp where the kids are there for 2 months, and I relished it. I loved it. Whether it was writing the play, the camp plays, and baking in private jokes that only the kids would appreciate and understand, that would get them excited, or creating, different ways to do talent shows or just different bunk activities. I took that on and loved it. And I was good at it. And It was something that it felt like a real challenge. And I felt like I learned a lot in those years. And I often think back to that when I was at TRL, I felt like I was applying the same the same ideas that I was using with these 15-year-old kids, I was suddenly using with Will Ferrell and Rihanna and Taylor Swift and whoever else was on TRL. So I learned a lot from those days, I would say, about creativity, about marketing, really, because you need to position different activities and different ideas to this very difficult audience, right? You have to know your audience the same way you have to know your audience in marketing. So I think I learned a lot from those days. And I would say that is really the experience that defines who I am.
Yeah, I can see that. And I can see how you've applied it even in your professional life. What advice would you give your younger self if you're starting this journey all over again?
So I touched on this earlier, but I would say I would tell myself, don't be intimidated by other industries because we all have far more in common than you think. It's a smaller world than you realize. And everybody wants to get better at efficiency because time is money. No matter what industry you're in, time is money. And if you can figure out how to solve for inefficiency, then problems do begin to melt away. So I would tell myself, don't limit yourself to one industry. What you are good at works anywhere, works with the C-suite, works with the interns at any company. And so I think that's what I would tell myself.
Awesome. So there's a topic you're trying to learn more about yourself, or maybe you think marketers need to be learning more about?
I think that this might seem obvious, but I really think that marketers need to do better at learning what their competitors are doing. And I know that's something that often they try to do, but I do think that there can be a tendency to belittle the competition or resent them if they're doing something better. And I'm just a big believer in learning from the competition, right? Figure out what your competition is doing. And if they're not doing it well, figure out why and how you could do it better. If they're crushing it, then learn from the best. So I think learning from your competitors, doing opposition research is something that I think is super important in every industry.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I hadn't thought about it, but we do tend many times to dismiss the competition for whatever reason. So I agree with you. That's a great call. Are there any trends or subcultures that you're following you think other people should be taking notice of?
So I'll say that in my job on the entertainment side, I love Reddit. I love going on Reddit and taking deep dives into what the fans are saying about whatever show I'm working on. So for Impractical Jokers right now, that's the show that I'm currently showrunning. There's a lot of craziness on Reddit, and there are a lot of bizarre rumors. People know the show sometimes better than I do, but I do think there's a tendency of people who work in the entertainment industry to dismiss people who are posting on Reddit boards about the show. The same way if you look at Amazon reviews, or if you're trying to rent an Airbnb, you look at some of the comments, you might roll your eyes at some of it, right? Some of it might be a little ridiculous. But I find that's a huge way, an incredibly important way to learn about how to make the show better, is to see what the fans think. So I go on Reddit all the time, and I would encourage people in the marketing world to find ways to follow what the consumers are saying about the product, right? And again, some of it you might disagree with, and I don't agree with everything I see on Reddit. I certainly don't follow everything I see on Reddit, but I learn a lot from it. And I think that's a hugely important tool.
Yeah. It's funny you said Reddit, and I even chuckled a minute because it can be a cesspool sometimes if you go too far in one direction. But I agree. It is a great microcosm of people and what they think and what they believe and what they're passionate about. So it's a good call. And we're a big fan. I'm a big fan of insight-driven marketing, and it's insights just waiting there for you to look through in terms of what people are thinking, what they're telling you. So
it's all there in front of you. Everyone in entertainment has a love-hate relationship with focus groups. Some of them just hate them. But you get 10 people in a room, 20 people in a room. Why should those people dictate what we're going to do on the next season of a TV show? And I would never say take that as gospel. But I do think that when you get random people into a room and you ask them questions, you learn a lot, whether it's your product or whether it's your TV show. So I think a huge key for why Impractical Jokers has been so successful, we've made over 300 episodes, is this connection that the show and the Jokers and I have with our fans, with the viewers. It's really this 360 experience. And I think that especially in today's world, that sort of 360 experience is what you need.
Last question for you. What do you feel is the largest opportunity or threat facing marketers today?
So I think the biggest threat is the battle against consumers' attention spans. I think that is a huge issue, and it's really hard to capture the minds and the attention of consumers. So in today's world, it's just in a TikTok world, it's so difficult. But I think that also opens up an opportunity for creative thinking, breaking through the clutter with smart, targeted marketing campaigns and ideas. And sometimes those ideas are super simple. I remember one of my favorite marketing moments was I had just graduated college and I was walking around the Upper West Side where I was living in New York City, and I saw a billboard. It was for a gym, and it had a drawing of an alien, and underneath it said, "When they come, they'll eat the fat ones first." And it was great. It was brilliant, right? It was this brilliant piece of marketing for this gym. And so I think there are really smart ways to reach people. And that's the kind of challenge that I embrace, but it is a challenge. It's really hard to get people's attention. Whatever industry you're in, I think that is probably a universal issue. If you add structure to the creative process when you're problem solving or brainstorming, you'll find your brain unlocking in different, far more productive ways. And I believe that you can penetrate the attention spans of kids or of adults, whatever you're trying to reach. And I think that if you can figure out ways to work more efficiently and problem solve more productively, then you'll go a lot farther, a lot faster.
Awesome. Simmy, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing thoughts about how to improve creative thinking. And for those that want to connect with Simmy, we'll show you how in the show notes.
Awesome, Alan. Thanks for having me on.
Hi, it's Alan again. Marketing Today was created and produced by me with post-production support from Sam Robertson. If you're new to Marketing Today, please feel free to write us a review on iTunes or your favorite listening platform. Don't forget to subscribe on marketingtodaypodcast.com. Tell your friends and colleagues about the show. I love hearing from listeners. You can contact me at marketingtodaypodcast.com. There you'll also find complete show notes and links to what was discussed in the episode today, and you can search our archives. I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today.